what am I doing here? But this 6 acres was planted in 2016, and then we put that for this part in 2017. And it ended up being way more grass dominated, but now you can see the Monarda came in. But it is thick, but they were two very, very different. Hi, I'm Meghan Milbrath, and we're on a planted prairie property in Jackson County. This was previously farmland and then was put into a wetland flower mix and a dryland pollinator mix. So there's about 8 acres in a dryland prairie, which you see behind us, and then there's about 16 acres that were put into wetland floral mix.
And you were saying on here for this particular site, here we're on like a sandy hill, which the previous landowner or current landowner still was trying to plant corn and soybeans and was having difficulty getting back in here. And then it kind of slopes down, you can see down there into, that's the muck, right? So you were trying to bring this back into pollinator habitat, wildlife habitat. And can you explain a little bit about your seed mix and how you came about selecting that? There's a lot out here, so maybe just kind of telling a little bit about how you came to plant what you did.
So this property is an 80-acre parcel that had been in corn soy rotation for decades, and most of the property still is farmed and is good land. This back part, either, as mentioned, was really, really sandy. So I mean, it's basically just straight sand on the hill where we are, and then where it's very mucky, and the muck was not drying out, so it was getting more and more difficult to farm. And so I made an agreement with the farmer and landowner that I would manage this into pollinator mix. So I'm a beekeeper, but I also really like native bees and conservation, and so I went for a very, very, very overly heavily floral mix, and also because I come out here every day to walk, or as many days as I can, so I wanted something that was pretty to look at. I definitely tried to focus on ones that the bees use a lot. I do have a little bee bias, but I like the monarchs and butterflies and moths and things as well. And then I focus on things that like to have consistent bloom as long as possible. So we start with the Zizia aurea, the golden alexander in the beginning, and then we'll have asters and sneezeweed all the way through October. So I try to have something that blooms kind of consistently throughout the year.
And you had mentioned that, I think I read you had something like 16 forb species in this mix, which that's helping you get all blooming periods. And then you had, in this case right here in the sandy soil, I think you had mentioned it's about a third grasses, which there's mainly 2 kinds of species there. And that's mainly because you're trying to get your blooming, but what's the purpose then of grass? Why add that in?
So the grasses add some structure. So the recommendation that I had, I think you required only 4 different forbs, and I went with 16 because I couldn't hold back and they were all pretty and I wanted them all.
4 should be a minimum, really,
yes, it was
if you're
a minimum.
doing pollinator. Yeah.
But, and then also, as you mentioned, I wanted to have the overlapping bloom, and there were some that I just personally liked. But you need the grasses to have the structure in between them. So I mostly went with the short grasses just because I wanted to see the flowers better, and I think they're really pretty. And then also it's very easy for me to have places to collect the tall grasses. So I did the initial planting, and then I go out and hand collect at other places around here for species that I don't have or that I want to bump up, and I can seed in bare patches over the last few years.
And real briefly, can you say for the sandy soil, when crop production stopped and you were getting ready to do this kind of planting, a little bit about the site prep and the equipment that you use, because I think that's something that is really critical to having a successful pollinator stand?
So the sandy part, we hardly had to do any site prep. When we came out here to look at it, there really weren't any aggressive, aggressive plants in the sandy part, and mainly because it was so sandy that it really wasn't a good place for even weeds to grow. So, and it had been in corn bean rotation, so the weeds had been suppressed pretty well. So I thought we were going to have to do a lot, and we ended up just basically not doing anything for the sandy part. So we planted in the summer.
And you did it with a broadcast?
We did it with a broadcast, and then we went over it with a cultipacker, and that was it. And then I did put in oat mix at the time, but that year we went straight into a drought, and hardly any of the oats, and I used bin oats, I couldn't find seed oats, and hardly anything came up. But I thought, because the soil was so bare, I thought I would need to have something to hold structure, but honestly it didn't come up, and it obviously was fine without it. The first year it was basically a tiny, like a few coreopsis, a few of the black-eyed Susan, and then mare's tail. And it was just like a crop of mare's tail. So we brush hogged it once, I think, maybe the first year, maybe twice, just to keep it. So the idea is that the little plants could come up and didn't get totally choked out as they were focusing on putting their roots down. But that was it. And then the next year, like every year for the next 3 years, it just got more and more and more. I think it took till about the third or fourth year till I was able to see every plant out here that was in the mix.
Right, and that's something that I think is really hard. We were talking about when you spend this amount of money, because it's not cheap.
No.
I think it was, you know, you're going to spend several $100s per acre on this, depending on your seed mix and what your goal is.
Definitely, like I've talked to people that were in the exact same position where the second year was mare's tail, and they're like, oh, we were going to like spray it all down and, you know, quit, because they thought that they had failed. And you just really have to reset your expectations. You
have to trust nature to do its way. And you had mentioned one thing that I thought was really interesting that maybe other people haven't thought about, is doing the black-eyed Susans, and your reasoning for that.
Yeah, so I knew that they historically come up the first year in a mix, and they were like the ones that I could be like, oh, good, it worked. And so
you
like
had good seed to soil.
Yep, and at least I knew that like the system worked in theory. And so that was and the black-eyed Susans aren't super competitive. Like you can see a couple here and there, and they maybe will get pushed out, or maybe we'll stay in a small amount. But the first year and then you could see a little of we did the sand or the lance leaf coreopsis too, and those came up the first year. But just a few, but just enough to know that the system worked.
Right.
So
you had a lot of work to get here, and it's been really cool. You can see it's really paying off. And you were mentioning too, one of the great things about this type of habitat is it's not static, right? You're always seeing something new. So the enjoyment and pleasure out of it is something that keeps on giving too.
Yeah.
Megan, do you want to talk about the case study and how that came about? And
oh yeah, so I should switch to like put my MSU shirt on now. So well, one of the main reasons that I wanted to do this for the pollinator habitat, and I've been doing prairie restoration work since I was in high school. Like it's just a thing that I love to do. So I wanted to do it anyway, but my job at MSU in Extension, I answer a lot of questions about putting in bee habitat. And so I wanted to go through the process myself, and to go through all of the paperwork, and to have the whole experience at the FSA and NRCS. And it has been really useful because, you know, I can help people set their expectations, and I can sympathetically say, like, I know it's different when it's your $10,000 in the ground, but then I can also help set expectations for the paperwork. I did make a joke that I didn't get a grant. I did paperwork for the government for a year in order to do it. You can cut that if you want. But it was a lot of, it felt like a lot of work. And I think once you're in the system and you have a sense, and you have a person that knows your property, and then it makes a big difference. So I'm excited to talk to them about doing both the maintenance for this now, because we are at that time period, and then potentially looking at doing some other next steps. Yeah,
like where to go from here, because this isn't just it, right? There's a lot more that you can tackle, I suppose.
Yeah, I have a nice 70-year plan in my head. So.
Did you say 7 or 70?
I said 70. That's resetting those expectations. Yeah.